don't have a gold star, I don't have a silver star, no, I don't have a bronze star. I'm a no-star lesbian. You can take me out to dinner. Please don't say you'd like me thinner, 'cause I won't change for you.
Myself and Anya Connell led the 1993 Pride March, 93, when we got to criminalisation. We were on the back of her motorbike, we were dykes on a bike. And even though it was legalised, we were stopped by a guard just after O'Connell Street, just after O'Connell Bridge. A guard stood in front of the two of us and said, "Get off that bike," right? And Anya said, well, we said no. And the guard said, "You have to have a licence for a vehicle in a parade like this." And Anya said, "I have a licence." And he said, "Get off the bike." And we said no. And we continued.
I think that a lot of the stuff around LGBT rights revolves around the now, because there are still pressing things that need to happen, and it revolves around the future and what we can do to make people's lives better. And what we don't consider an awful lot is the past. And we all know how dangerous it is to forget one's history.
You can say you're gender fluid, lipstick, lesbian, macho, druid. Anything you want to be, it's alright with me, it's alright.
Oh, that's a big question.
I would identify as probably as a feminist first, then Irish, then lesbian. Yeah, probably in that order.
When I wrote my autobiography, I said, "You can call me lesbian now for a week after that, we go back to now."
I identify as being lesbian.
I identify as lesbian woman.
I identify as queer, and generally I identify as non-binary.
I am also queer and non-binary.
The books, you wear your sexuality on your sleeve.
I think when I came out, it was kind of the late 80s, early 90s, and lesbian was quite a difficult word to get your mouth around, you know, partly because it was stigmatized. It wasn't a word you heard very often. So I think I probably started with gay, and then would have just started to use dyke as well, which I would also identify as actually as well, and kind of maybe became more used to using the word lesbian through just as I became more used to being out myself. And queer, I think, kind of came in sometime in the 90s, and it just, you know, it was just started to get used so commonly, and it made sense to me in its with its alternative edge and stuff. So I just started to use that too.
I mostly would define as queer, but I'm a dyke.
So I describe myself simply as born female, became a woman rage, and a lady by choice.
I think we have a much deeper and more generous understanding, I think, really, of sexuality as a spectrum now. So, yeah, I think lesbian, but I I don't think ever said this on camera, but really, I think basically I was born a gay man. It just got a bit muddled along the line.
I'm a human being that loves women in all forms, and I love people in all forms as well. But when it comes down to what's important, to get down with the get down, it's women for me. So I would identify as lesbian.
Oh, well, I identify as a lesbian, and I've been very clear about using that word as my identification. You know, certainly since I have spoken about my identity publicly, and I also was very keen to use that word to identify myself in my public political life, whether that was in the Shannon, and I think that's the first time probably I used it in the Shannon, and then obviously later in the Dáil. In the context of the Shanna too, that I also wanted to say that, you know, I was a married lesbian and that was important too.
I'd go between lesbian, dyke, queer.
I identify as a lesbian, dyke, queer woman.
Lesbian, gay, I don't mind so much, or dyke, but I prefer lesbian or dyke.
I identify as lesbian, but in terms of where identity politics has emerged and gone since I came out, I suppose that has all sorts of different kind of connotations now. So I don't even know whether I would wonder why do I have to identify in terms of sexual orientation in some circumstances, do you know? But yeah, I would identify as lesbian.
I identify as bisexual, but with the lean towards guys. Sorry. I'm bisexual and I don't know, yeah, good a girl, but a guy.
I came out in the 70s and there was nobody else out at that time, not publicly out. So I was bisexual. I had already a girlfriend who was my lover. We were lovers. I met her at school and we got together when we were 18. But there wasn't the word lesbian, there wasn't the word gay, the only word was homosexual, and that didn't apply to us. Neither of us, you know, could identify with that either. And she had boyfriends, I had boyfriends. So when I was in France, there was a college, one of my college lecturers there who was very interesting and very sympathetic to me and obviously liked me. Brought me over to a disco, a light show as they called them in Paris then, one of these really spectacular things, you know, where they display images on a ceiling in this huge beautiful building with this massive domed ceiling. And I saw some of the most beautiful people in my life. And I just thought, these are my people, you know. I thought, if I'm not gay, I'm going to pretend to be.
I identify as bisexual, and it was an interesting one because, like yourself, I didn't really think that there was an intermediary between, I don't know, gay or straight. So it took me a while to get to that point where I could say I was bisexual, but yeah, so that's what I'd say.
I identify as non-binary and pansexual.
I'm non-binary and pansexual. I'm bisexual. I think I was lucky because I was growing up at a time where that label was more freely used, so the concept was there for me to take on, and I didn't have to stress so much about whether or not I was straight or gay because the information was available to me.
I identify as bisexual, and when I was in second year I came out to my dad as being a lesbian and he gave me a high five, and then I like figured out along the way that I am bisexual, and then he was like really chill about it, and I'm so thankful that I live in a time where it's so accepted.
If I'm brutally honest, I don't particularly care, because for me it isn't something that matters where I fall on the spectrum per se of sexualities. So yeah, if I had to put a label on it, I'd probably say bisexual, but all in all, it isn't something that matters to me.
I identify as a lesbian feminist.
As a lesbian woman.
A lesbian, yeah. I identify as lesbian or queer or dyke.
Lesbian. You can go first. Lesbian? Cis, just, you know, just lesbian. I am lesbian and gender fluid, so I don't know what my gender is, but I am girls.
When I come out, I suppose the first thing I was, and I was late teens, early 20s, first thing I was probably a gay woman. And then in later years, as I got more politicised, I was a lesbian. Although I think my favourite term of all is a dyke. I like that, you know, I was literally a teenage bar dyke, so yeah.
I would identify myself as lesbian or gay, but if I had to do it all over again, I'm kind of liking the gender fluid phrase, because I think over my life that, you know, it would have been nice to dance along, up and down along that line. So I like gender fluid, but usually it's lesbian or gay.
Years ago I used to say I was gay. I don't know when that changed actually, do you know? But I would identify myself now as a lesbian woman.
I suppose I just think I'm a lesbian.
I use the term gay because far too many people say, oh, you're a lesbian, as though that defines you. Certainly you could say lesbian, but I would more say I'm a lesbian than gay burners, a heterosexual. What does that tell me about anybody? So I prefer to say gay.
For myself, I say I'm a dyke, and if I'm talking to my friends, I'd say dyke. Yeah, it feels strong, it kind of feels a bit stroppy. I like it, and I just associate it with me and my friends, really. But it depends on context then. I do say I'm lesbian, and I do say I'm lesbian feminist. In some times when I'm asked, depending on who again, I might say I'm gay. It feels like a softer introduction to it if I think they're going to have difficulty. And a lot of people that I know that I've come out to, say at work and places like that, have, when I've used the word dyke, they said, no, don't say that. Don't say that about yourself. Don't.
Identity, identity, identity. Who am I? Not afraid to smash the sky without fear, without shame. Labels, tags, numbers, names. Anything you want to be, it's alright with me. It's alright.
The obvious one is sexual attraction to women, but it's also, I think, about being generally attracted to women, to women's ideas, to women's way of being, to organising with women, working with women. You know, and the old cliche about hating men is just a nonsense to me. I don't hate men, I enjoy men's company, but by and large you get different things from men than you do as women. And I think as a lesbian, growing up as a lesbian in Belfast, I, you know, spent most of my time with women, I suppose, and some gay men as well in the earlier days.
Well, my first, if you want to say, like, realization or identity was around being feminist. So, like, that was my initial, and then it's like you know, that was my route in as well to even being able to find lesbianism, if you like. And so that's what my awakening was around, a notion around the equality of women, around just appreciating women, enjoying women, women's company, women's intelligence, women's books. Do you know, it was all that. I was studying psychology, and it was all about trying to understand, you know, gender differences in terms of, and this is way back in the 80s, early 80s. So like that, the thinking was very much around stereotyping and all that kind of stuff. So for me, lesbianism is a bit more, it's not just about sexual attraction, it's emotional attraction, it's about interest in the way that mind is working.
I think being a lesbian has definitely, in order to kind of learn about that more, and when I was coming out, I definitely read a lot of feminist texts and things. So I think politically, I think it made me very politically aware. It made me very socially conscious, and also like in terms of feminism, but in terms of broader social issues as well. So I think my lesbianism has made me more politically aware through my whole life.
That would involve being part of a minority and all that entails in terms of discrimination, negative messages over the years and still today. That would be a big part of it, I think, yeah.
I think for me it was primarily a sexual urge, desire, that I realised that my desire was leading me towards women. But there's no doubt that the context in which that happened for me was a very woman-led, woman-invested, woman-inhabited context of the women's movement in the 1980s and up into the 1990s. So it is true that while I had lived my life as a straight woman, I had a daughter, I had a partner, kind of, who was straight, man, I was living my everyday life absolutely with women, and therefore that opportunity, that sense of possibility of desire opening up to something else was there for me. Whereas if I had grown up in a different kind of community, a different kind of context, it might have taken much longer, it might never have happened, who knows?
What I learned very quickly, the first time I was with my current partner, and I've been with her for the past 18 years, and what I learned very quickly was it was beyond a sexual connection. I learned that the emotional energy that women possess is very, very different than the emotional energy that a lot of men possess. I'm sure there would be women that would be on the more masculine side of that, but for me, I learned that I had a collective energy with my partner, and it was more like a creation in and of itself, a dance, a ballet, where we were both principal dancers in it. So for me, being with the woman, and I have to ask the question again, is more about the energy that is very different, the female energy I find, and this is only from my own experience, which is probably very limited, is a very emotionally charged space.
My sexual identity and my identity is also intrinsically linked to feminism as a philosophy and as a worldview, and as a political point of view. So I think that I think it must be a little harder for heterosexual women to maintain a feminist line, because inevitably their sexual identity involves interaction with patriarchy in a way that lesbianism doesn't. And so I suppose dykes are kind of lucky, because in terms of having feminism as a central political, philosophical, identifying everything kind of 360 worldview, in addition to that, you have a distance from patriarchy in a way that is really helpful to try and disrupt it and dismantle it and confront it. So I think that feminism interacting and intersecting with my sexual identity is very key.
The dykes I knew, who I grew up with, were fierce, amazing women for the most part. Defining features around that: smart, compassionate, infuriating, contrary, gorgeous. There's something for me around, people talk about the sisterhood and all this in this very kind of 70s way. I certainly experienced that in Ireland growing up as a teenager, when I found especially women who were slightly older than me. And the defining feature there was, I'm not saying all those people, none of us are perfect. And I'm sure there have been so many fallouts, and people fight with each other, and people kind of splitting off this way and that way or whatever. But bottom line is we look out for each other, and I think there's I think it's not untrue to say that if you've gone through the experience of growing up queer in Ireland at a certain time, that it does instill a certain kind of compassion in you for others who are different and maybe have been through the same thing. So yeah, there's a lot of defining features around the dykes, I know, and I said some of them are infuriating, and I probably include myself in that, but mostly just gorgeous.
I don't have a check shirt, I don't have a swirly skirt, I got an ass that is quite pert, and a mouthful of delicious dirt for you.
Dyke means feminist, lesbian, strong, powerful. No, it sounds too aggressive. But look, I was so upset about, I wrote about my autobiography, the word lesbian rang out like a rifle shot. I didn't want to be known as lesbian. Once briefly, the singer Joseph Locke came on television. We were both on the Late Late Show, and I to sing The Town I Love So Well, and he sang it very badly and slowly. And, you know, I was in the wrong. I said, God, you blew that. He says, we all know it, you are. Don't blame him, he was a singer, even if he did ruin it. And something happened now, what happened? Oh, I was at one of those festivals or events up around the border. Possibly in Crossnaglen. I was speaking, it was a feminist day. And after the speech, some woman, this happened all the time, a young woman came up to talk to me, and I was sitting talking to her. And I, after I said, well, cheerio, and I went back out onto the street. Where this man comes up to me, said, that was my wife you were talking to. I said, oh, was it? And he said, I dare you try to get off my wife. I said, I wasn't trying to get off your wife, we were talking about contraception. And he slapped me in the face. That was the only time it's ever happened.
I came out, I mean, as I said, I met my first girlfriend in '74. I decided to look for another kind of spiritual outlet, and the charismatic renewal was really popular at the time in life. So I joined a community. And as I said, I used to go to meetings on a Wednesday night, which were support meetings. And I used to go to the Sunday meetings as well, which involved Mass and other community things. So, so when I split up and I was upset and really lovesick, I was just so, I couldn't get over it by myself. I needed help. And within the community, within my support group actually, there was a priest who was supposed to have a gift of healing. And he invited me to come and have a number of sessions with him. During one of the sessions, he told me that I shouldn't look at women's magazines anymore, any women's magazines, because of the underwear ads in the women's magazines. He asked me, was I butcher femme? I hadn't heard those words yet, and I didn't know the answer. So he asked me which one of us used to initiate sex. And I thought about it, and I thought, me. And this didn't fit with his picture, because he thought he had a picture of me as being an innocent femme who probably was seduced by this butch woman, and this didn't fit the model at all. He did recession therapy with me, which involved me lying down and closing my eyes and going into some kind of, I don't know, altered state, I suppose. And he got me to do these imagination things, where I was to imagine I was in bed with my lover, and then Jesus came into the room and saw us together, and he wanted to know how did I think Jesus felt. Now, I had thought about that quite a lot, because at the time Jesus was very much part of my life, as was my lover, and it was all together, and spirituality and sexuality and everything was all part of the whole blessed mix-up. So I said Jesus was fine. And he wasn't pleased with that answer at all. He slammed down on a table near me and he said, you're going to continue to romanticize this thing. I'm not going to be able to help you any further. And then finally he did another session with me that involved the sacrament of the sick. This is extreme unction. This is what you get when you're going to die. This is under this kind of thinking. Also what you get when you're sick, to heal you of being sick. So he took out a bottle of olive oil, and he asked me if I had any connection with the occult first. Us witchy lesbians, but I didn't know that at the time either. So I said no. And so he did this anointing of the oil and stuff, and he asked me, did I masturbate? And he anointed my hands against masturbation. I had to say how sorry I was and stuff. And he anointed other parts of my body. And when he came to my genitals, he told me I was to take the bottle home. Thank goodness. I have since spoken with men who have had their genitals anointed in rituals like this. I now consider that to be ritual abuse. I'm not saying that he sexually, I think he had his sexual fantasies that he didn't think, I don't think he thought he was putting them on me. I think he was putting them on me. And I think that thing of the sacrament of the sick for being gay is a perversion. One of what I think their thing should mean, even. There I mean Christians or Catholics, really. It was a shaming of me, and it was a ritual shaming, and it did involve sexuality, and it was wrong. It was very wrong. One of the women that I met afterwards, after ringing Lesbian Line and going up those stairs and meeting those women, she came along to a meeting with me, and she said, "They're all getting off on this." She named it quite quickly, you know. She said, "They're all into this, they're all getting off on this. Come on, let's get out of here." I thought, she's right. And I got out of there. And there was more to it, because it took a lot of time to, what I now understand is exercise all that out of myself. Actually, Catherine Zappone and Anne-Louise Gilligan would have helped. Catherine gave a series of talks on feminist theology in the 80s in Milltown. Coincidentally, that's where that whole sacrament of the sick thing happened to me as well. And that whole thing introduced me to whole new ways of thinking that got a lot of this out of my system and helped in the healing, really. Yeah. And also meeting other women who were similar to myself, who maybe had gone through some things like that, because I wasn't the only one. I certainly wasn't the only one that had those kinds of ideas, you know, about your spirituality, and had feelings of shame and rejection, and who wanted to continue with some form of spirituality, but felt that Christianity and Catholicism in particular had failed them, and who were now looking for spiritual expression in some other way. So I met women who were creating their own rituals, who were on women's lands. Again, this is part of the cultural thing of being a dyke. And yeah, I mean, I found myself walking along a country road looking for a megalithic stone circle one winter solstice night, identifying as a witch with a whole bunch of other women who were going to make a ritual in that place, and thinking, gosh, where I've come from, you know, where I am now.
But you know, when I was younger, I wanted to become a nun. I mean, an institution full of women and baked goods did sound appealing. Still does. Like, I could eat scones, they could eat me. So as I was thinking about lesbian nuns, his little squire burst in and said, "I have faith because of Padre Pio, because he bled a pint of blood from his hands every day for 40 years. I thought of a period joke, but I had to stop myself. But it did get me thinking about faith, and what do I believe in? Well, I told him, I said, I believe in Mary, you know, the Mother Earth, nature, the environment, pure life force.
It was many, many years ago, and at that time I used to very often do the Andy O'Mahony Sunday morning radio programme, which was a bit like Marion nowadays, and you talk about the newspapers. And one of the things that had come up in the papers this particular week was a statement that somebody had, a lesbian or a gay man, had been discriminated against in the workplace. And I hadn't been introduced on the programme, by the way, as lesbian, because you never got introduced in that way. So this item was in the newspaper, and there was a young gay man on the panel with me, And he said, oh, well, of course, this is very unusual because there isn't any discrimination anymore about against lesbians and gay men in the workplace. And of course, I became completely apoplectic and took off on flight number 99 and said, excuse me, let me just sort things out for you, young man, here and now. I went into a long description of the ways with Andy, sort of saying, go for it, you know, of what exactly was happening lesbian and gay men in the workplace. Fine, program over, I went home. Sunday evening I made my regular phone call to my mother, and as soon as she lifted the phone I realised that the winds of Siberia were blowing very fiercely indeed. And I said to them, are you okay there, Mum? And she said, no. I said, and what's wrong? She said, that programme. I said, right, and what was it? Well, she said, there you were, using that bedroom language of a Sunday. And I realised that being lesbian for her was bedroom language.
It's a thing that I noticed enormously. Any of the discos, as they would have been in the 80s, it always ended up in some form of, you know, violence. Is people getting into fights? Who are you looking at? And I remember coming out and a woman banging some other woman's head against a bonnet of a car. And it's just, I suppose, so many people were not out during the week, and the only night they were out was, we were never given Saturday night as a lesbian night. As you'd be aware, it's usually Thursday. If you were very lucky, you got Friday night. So people, that was just their one night of the week to be out and be themselves. And when you added a whole load of drink on top of that, and the stress that people were under, and as also the stress of living in the middle of a war. And it's lovely now to see the occasions where there are no fights now. People are much more at home with themselves and actually feel safer.
I've had a few kind of physical attacks and beatings and stuff like that. At college, I went to college in my 30s. I used to work as a printer, and actually there was 18 of us in the class. There was 2 other women, well, girls that were 18 years old, and one of them was absolutely convinced I fancied her. I no more fancied her than fly in the air. But I was in the same tutor group as her, and she kept telling me, her tutorials were cancelled. So I wouldn't turn up to tutorials, and so I just got into terrible trouble for not turning up. So, and when I confronted her eventually about it, because I had to go for a misconduct thing, and she was all suspended for a bit and blah blah blah, was that she said that she thought I fancied her and that she was really scared. And she didn't like being in the same room as a lesbian, and there was 3 of us in the room, so all that kind of stuff.
I got beat up and down, and it was called the Pit. It was at the back of the Ritz beside the Shannon. I was coming up the steps, and I went and of course told the guards, because that's what you're supposed to do. And so he was writing down what had happened. Did it take anything? I was like, no. Do you know what it was about? And I was saying, well, probably because I have a girlfriend, because that's they were shouting at me. And then he closed the book and he says, well, what do you expect? And I felt like every little bit of blood in my body just left. It was like, and that, it really stuck with me. You know, what do you expect?
Well, I was living down in Cork with my partner at the time, and there was this bar that we used to go to. My partner had worked in this bar, and we were in there this night for a drink. We used to go up on a Sunday night for a game of pool. It was the only place that had a pool table. I was actually going over to play a straight woman at pool, and my partner gave me a kiss on the cheek and said, good luck. And I'm up playing pool, and I could see the owner coming down to my partner and are getting really red in the face, and I said, what's happened? And she said, I'll tell you later. And I said, I'd prefer if you tell me now. And she told me he had actually told her if we didn't give over that behaviour, we had to leave. And he actually came up into my face with a pint tumbler. I thought I was going to get a glass into the face, and I shook. I remember I had gastroenteritis for a few days after. I'd never came across that type of homophobia or aggression to that extent, and we took a court case and we won the court case. It was called a kiss in the end, so if you Google the kiss, the whole thing comes up.
I came from a black America that said I was not good enough because of something that I couldn't choose, the color of my skin. You know, I came from a black America that said you know, you're a nigger, and they spat in my face and they called me names, and in a Catholic school that was private. I came from that space, so I'll be damned if I'm gonna go backwards in that space and relive in a ghetto-like situation to be me.
I think it's different. I think there's a lot more supports there. There seems to be more acceptance there amongst peers, but at the same time, young people are really vulnerable still. Like the levels of self-harm are through the roof among young LGBT people, way higher than for heterosexual youth. So there's something not right there still, you know. And I do think, I suppose from what I believe from the referendum was brilliant in getting that passed, that vote passed. There's another generation at least in, you know, getting rid of the scars that aren't impacted by growing up with that, you know, as Panty said, checking yourself, do you know, it's or dealing with that homophobia. There's at least another generation in it.
I think LGBT people are very fucking forgiving, and I think we forgive in order to survive, because I think if we held on to every moment of unfairness or rejection, we'd go mental.
You can say you're butcher femme, you can say you're butcher bam, drag king or disco queen, party animal or non-scene. I don't mind if you're any of them, oh, I don't care if you're any of them. It's okay to be none of them. Identity, identity, identity. Who are you? Who am I? Woman, man, trans or bi, he or she, it or them. Labels, tags, numbers, names, anything you want to be. It's alright with me.
In Glasnevin, for Elizabeth O'Farrell and Julia Brennan. Finding the words carved on their plain granite headstone. Faithful comrade, lifelong friend, reminds me of my grandmother who used to say, there was none of that in my day. I wish I could ask the faithful Julia and Elizabeth, were they grateful for the mercy of sharing a grave? Did they choose those words to save them from shame? Did they have someone to tell that though the words said so much, they didn't say enough? And when they nursed the rebellion's wounded, did they question the cost of a new free state?
There we go, lovely little tomatoes and little chili peppers. Come on. I wished I was, no, this is like 50 years ago. Well, 51 years ago, 51 and a half years ago. Anyway, yeah, I remember thinking really clearly that I wished I was a man because I could marry women. Now, this is right the age of 7 there. And yeah, and then just ever since, right, we were all tomboys as everybody, well, I thought everybody was. Our gang was tomboys. We were always better than the boys at football. We were always better than the boys at climbing, blah, 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 although we had a big gang. But that was just kind of like, yeah, it was just how things were. And then 14, that's when I actually kind of found the words. That was, my auntie used to have 2 dogs. And I was kind of dog sitting one day because they were never left alone or anything like that, 2 staffies. And she had a television, one of the few televisions, and then underneath there was all these magazines, and there was this Scottish Women's Way, which was like a kind of women's magazine. And it had this article about, like, say, homosexuals, and like how, I mean, it didn't have the word lesbian or gay, it was like homosexuals. And there was this group, Scottish minority group in Edinburgh, and it had a phone number, and I phoned up the phone number. I was all shaking and da. And there was 2 women came out to the house, because my man used to work night shifts, so it's every fortnight anyway. Rosie and Linda came out to the house, and I was like homosexual, and I think I'm homosexual, and this and that, and the next thing, and Rosie, who was really severe, she kind of looked at me, and she said, "We prefer to be called gay, actually." And that was my first kind of hearing of the word gay. I was absolutely mortified, absolutely mortified.
Somebody was to speak at UCD for the first Women's Week ever on gay life, and there was to be a man and a woman, and I remember writing the speech on my mother's kitchen table because I happened to be out visiting her at the time. I can still see the copybook I wrote it on, and I got up and I just wanted to shake the place up. I was just thrilled, you know, to be provocative. I had no sense of what I was leading myself into. And that's probably just as well, because I don't know if I'd have had the courage to do it. But from the start, I was like, you know, you need to learn something, all you straight people out there. You are the ones with a hang-up, not us, and you need to learn from us, and I'm going to tell you what I think of you. And there was a journalist there from the Irish Times, and she said, "Do you mind if I knew they were recording it. And I said, "Well, maybe you wouldn't spell my name the right way because we're the only ones in the country." And she said, "Okay, I'll do that." And then we opened the page the next day, Irene and I, in fear and trembling. We were living in Dublin in a flat by then. And we opened the paper, and on the front page of the Irish Times, there was a banner headline. And of course, my first thought, like every Irish person alive, is, what is my mother going to say? Because she didn't know. She knew that there was this really strong feeling between myself and Irene, and she was always very respectful of it. She could feel, you know, the deep, deep connection. And I remember her saying once to us, "But what are you going to do if either of you ever gets married? What will the other one do?" And I said, "Well, she'll move in, of course. You know, we'll all move together." That was my answer at the time. So anyway, just by chance, she didn't see it, which was a small miracle. So we had a bit of breathing space. And then something like 10 days later, we went out to visit her, and she was standing, this is all iconic because it's like an Irish poem. She was standing at the sink, this is Seamus Heaney, you know, and she was peeling the potatoes, what else, because it was Sunday lunch, and the tears were running down her face and dripping into the basin. My sister came over, and she had a wonderful sense of humour, and she was always shocking my mother by telling her the blatant truth so you couldn't believe it, you know. And she said, "Oh, but sure, everybody knows but you, Mom. You know, it's just that you're such an old fuddy-duddy, you know, you're just so stuck in," which she wasn't, but pretending she was. And she said, "Everybody knows about Mary but you, you know." So that actually did help my mother. And we drove my sister back to the airport, and on the way home, my mother talked to me for the first time. And we had a long drive back from the airport, and we began to talk about it. And she said, "You know, well, I suppose I knew really in a way, you know, the classic thing. But you'll have to understand that I don't understand about the sexuality." And she really didn't, because as my sister said later to me, "But sure, how could she, Mary? You know, I mean, she doesn't even know about the clitoris, you know. All she knows is the missionary position. She wouldn't even know it was called that, you know. How could she understand lesbianism?"
Well, it was in the 80s, and I know when I was going to school and stuff that prior to my own awareness of myself, I knew, you know, you'd be having the giggles and the laughs and the sneaky cigarettes out the back of the shelter or whatnot in school, and the conversations then about boys and, you know, and I just wasn't getting it at all.
Then I just said to myself, you know, I can't lead a double life anymore. So I just, I'd come out to a few people and I told my children, but I hadn't told my parents yet. And the woman that I was in the relationship with that ended up hitting me, I'd finished it with her and we were in Handlands, a pub on the North Side of the Road, having Mother's Day dinner. She wanted to still continue on the arrangements we had. And she sat there all day crying, do you know? And my sister kept saying to her, and then my mother said to her, "What's wrong with you, love? Did somebody upset you?" And of course she told me my mother what upset her was me. And then I came out to my mother and my father that day, Mother's Day. My sister kept saying, "You know, you never knew the right time or the right place." I said, "There isn't the right time or the right place." And there, you know, I don't think it's anything that you can preempt. It just, things just happen, do you know?
I was well into my 30s when I came out, and I'd already had quite a complicated history of relationships, sexual relationships, complicated for Ireland because I had been very briefly married at one point for 6 months, and then just was, was involved with various men and had a daughter. But of course I was still married to somebody else. My daughter's father didn't even live here in Dublin. It was an incredibly complicated situation. And my coming out as lesbian absolutely didn't help that at all. In fact, it was very difficult for me because at that time, I'm thinking back now to, really I suppose it was the 1980s, to come out as lesbian, if you had a family, you were putting your family at risk. You absolutely were. You were putting your family at risk in the sense that your right and your capacity to be that mother of that child or children was subject to interrogation, contest, opening. So, I remember people saying to me at the time, that's a very dangerous thing for you to do. When I say people, actually I mean other lesbians who were saying that's a very dangerous thing for you to do. And it turned out to be true. That was dangerous. My daughter went to live with her father quite shortly after I came out, and that at the time was extremely painful. And I remember my parents, I think it was my mother, saying to me, why are you not taking a case? And I couldn't take a case because I couldn't come out as lesbian at that point. I think in retrospect I probably could have, but I still wouldn't have taken a case actually. But that would have been for other reasons, not to upset her. It's still very difficult to talk about that because while all worked out in the end, it was hard because it seemed to me that I had lost my daughter. We found one another again and I didn't really lose her, but she was removed from me and there wasn't anything really that I could do about it except stop being lesbian. And that wasn't something that I was able to do. It wasn't even, well, was I willing? I just wasn't able to do that.
I met my first lover when I was 18 and I had come up from the country, and as a country girl with no relatives in Dublin, I went to stay in a hostel that was run by nuns on Mount Street, St. Bernadette's. Lovely place, actually. 100 girls, the doors locked at 10:30 or something, and just us together. And I met my first lover there, and I lived with her for 5 years. So we met in the hostel, we moved out together, we lived together, but I hadn't seen another gay person. I hadn't seen another lesbian. I hadn't, either in real life, well I would have of course in real life, but I didn't know that. And what I'm saying is, it's not like it is now with people who are gay representation on television, on the radio, in soaps, in magazines. The thing of not seeing anybody at all meant that I didn't know if I was gay. It wasn't until I phoned Lesbian Line, told them a little bit about where I was at, and then walked up the stairs of the Hirschfeld Centre for the first time. And at the top of the stairs, it opened out into a room that was kind of dark, and there was a bar and there was a dance floor, and there was a group of women, probably about 20, 30 maybe, sitting in there. And I thought, oh my God, I'm one of these people. And they looked like me, right? They had flat shoes, they had short hair, sometimes, not always, but they were wearing at that time, and this is 1980, they looked like me, I looked like them. And I felt at home instantly.
I suppose when I was a teenager in school, I first started talking to my friends about being bi, and that was very much around conversations about the music we were listening to. The people we were looking up to was very much like tail end of Riot Girl stuff, and that's how I found out about, different sexual identities through Courtney Love talking about them. I know that white girl purists would not like her to be included in that same thing, but however, that was an access point. And then in college, I was still dating men, and then that kind of very much ended quite quickly. And I so I suppose, like, you know, 21, 22, when I guess I was going out on the scene earlier than that, but that was very much was like, okay, no, this is actually what my identity is and this is what I'm going to do. But even though, like, I'm 34 now, and I think that even, like, for me, like, I left school in 2001, which when you think about it is very recent. But even during that time, like, I didn't have access points to what lesbian culture was. I didn't know any dykes. I didn't, you know, it's just so different now. Like, when I think about women who are even 5, 6, 7, 10 years younger than me, I really think that maybe my generation of women in their early 30s was like the last queer female generation to, well, first of all, we're pre-internet, and also that a lot of that stuff wasn't available to us. So when I hear women in their 40s, 50s and 60s talking about their coming out experiences and their experiences growing up, I identify very strongly with that. I guess growing up in a, you know, conservative social context, blah, blah, blah. Yet when I hear women who are far closer in age to me but younger, I think their experiences are really, really different. You know, I think the first lesbian only thing that I went to was like a salsa dancing event in the IFI or something, and I was probably like 19 or 20, and I walked in the door and I was like, I can't do this, and I had to walk out. So when you think about that now, like, that sounds like something from the 70s or something, but it was like, you know, 2000. So I think it has changed a lot. So my access points were still very analog to lesbian culture.
Oh, I came out, I was a late bloomer. I came out in 2002 with, and I was in a marriage prior to that for about 20 years. And 3 of those years that I was married, I had a clandestine relationship with a woman, and I had a fear that was beyond fear. You know, it was something beyond fear. It was all consuming, that somehow I was going to be destroyed. I was going to lose my children. I was going to lose my reputation. I would lose everything if I turned my back on, you know, the idea of being in the perfect marriage where I had a successful, strong black man with 2 beautiful children. I had the 6-figure income. I had the house that was built from the ground. I had the skylights in the bathroom and the hot tub and everything. And to leave that, and then I moved to Europe. So I was a black woman now with a passport, able to see the world, which was something that was not a part of the community that I grew up in. So for me, I thought I would lose everything, and I was just really crippled with fear.
I think I was 17 when I first started questioning, and then I kind of opened up to really close friends when I was around 18, and now I think it's just a thing of, like, I don't openly state it, or I'm kind of in a way private about it, but if someone does come up to me and ask, then I'm cool with saying it and that kind of thing. So I'm kind of open if you ask about it, and most of my close friends know.
I came out around the time of the marriage referendum, because I just sort of noticed that I was being a little too supportive of the yes side, just a little bit, like, you know, like, just again, like a really good ally. And so I didn't really come out though. I came out to myself at that time. I never really came out. I sort of just, people sort of, it's just a known fact, really. I bring it up when it comes up in conversation, and yeah, coming out isn't really my style.
My mom likes to tell me that I came out when I was 4, so when I came out to her and we were sitting down, I was like, you know, I feel like I should do this, you know, like, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to be like, okay, so I like girls. So I was thinking this through my head, and I was like, okay, I can do this, I can so do this, it's easy. And then I said it, and she was like, oh, I know. I was just waiting for you to say it. And I was like, really? And she's like, I knew since you were 4. And I was like, that's not, I didn't know when I was 4. I know you knew because you put a girl in your car when you're playing the game of life, you know, so you're going to be married to a girl. And I was like, that's not coming out as a 4-year-old. Yeah, so technically I came out when I was 4, but I came out to myself when I was around 11, and I was like, wow, I liked girls in my primary school. I just thought they were great friends, but I actually really liked them.
No.
That's cool to know.
So I came out as bisexual when I was 13 and trans when I was 15.
But Nuala finally said, who would let a trivial detail like gender prevent them from loving someone? See, Nuala would never describe herself as lesbian. It used to annoy me, even though I was pleased. And then a light went on in my head, that's it. When love is on offer, who would let a trivial detail like gender stop them loving? So the future is wide open. So I have to check myself sometimes when I say, maybe we're all bisexual. I prefer to use the term sexual or gender fluid, but in order to be sexual, I think men are going to have to improve their game more than a little. Who knows what I could have been.
She's a wild child. She breaks all the rules. She won't be patronized. She won't suffer fools. She will speak her mind. She will stand her ground. She's tough enough. She won't be shoved around. Says if you don't like it, might as well be hung for a sheep as a lamb. She's not like the rest. She wants to see the world. She won't take second best. She just won't be told. She says she loves to love. She likes all the girls. She likes to play with boys. She likes to make big noise.
Hello, Global Lesbian Line, can I help you?
I was walking with Irene about a week after I came back up Grafton Street, and we saw this poster, Sexual Liberation Movement Meets Here Tonight. And over we went to Trinity College, and there were 4 people in the room, 2 gay men, 1 lesbian and 1 straight woman who always just joined in to bring up the numbers. And they looked at myself and Irene and they said, what are you? And we said, well, we're lovers. And they said, are you monogamous? And we said, no, not really, you know, we sleep with guys too. And they said, and Margaret McWilliams, who would be happy to be honoured here, Margaret McWilliams looked across and said, oh, well, you're bi then, we'll put you down as bi. And was delighted, you know, to have another category.
I would always sort of look at it, you know, while the war was on in the north and when after the war finished. And while the war was on, I probably, although I met a lot of different people, but most of the lesbian and gay people I knew were very active in, you know, equality, struggles for equality, in the various relative support groups and all of that. And I noticed after that it was almost as though people's the support to being different, it increases when, you know, when there's actually not so much, you know, there's not guys in uniform carrying guns wandering around. You know, you could get into a lot of trouble even just going home on a Saturday night with a few drinks in you. So there was more room for people expressing their difference. So I've noticed a real shift and change in that people used to say, oh, the lesbians only exist downtown. And I knew that wasn't true from the Shankill, never mind the false. But they people started you know, coming out of their areas a lot more because it was safer too.
I mean, I always think that nobody thinks I'm a lesbian, but geez, in them days I had no hair. I used to wear I used to have this combat jacket because, like, see, in the north it was like, see, when the war was going on, you weren't allowed to wear combat jackets, so you were just doing all these kind of, like, it was just like a progression of political acts, and it was kind of easier for me to do the political acts than for people that was living there at the time. No, I wasn't just doing like a solo, like, political acts, do you know what I mean? It was kind of like a few years, but that was kind of like my point of view, that it was just important to be everything. It was important to be in Women Against Imperialism and be involved in that, because a lot of the groups, like, see, the left-wing groups, they were all, it was all kind of like macho and what would the thing be, like, very heterosexual, and it just made it uncomfortable for, it wasn't as open enough as it should be in terms of socialism, communism, feminism, the left, Marxism, all that kind of republicanism, anything. It was just, so everything was political. It was, I mean, in them days it was like the personal was political.
I came out into a really strong, vibrant, thriving, kind of rich lesbian community in Cork in the 1980s. And Dublin's always had a bigger scene, but Cork's always had a real strong sense of community. So I kind of really felt like I came into that very, very strong, vibrant community. And that was really positive because, you know, the 1980s was a very negative time in lots of ways for being a woman in Ireland, not mind being queer.
In terms of motivation for getting involved, I sometimes think the only real motivation there's been for getting involved in lesbian stuff is to meet women. I mean, I think if we're honest, that's where it starts. But of course, once you do that, once you meet women, you form a community, and it's about what can we do here, you know, how can we make things better for ourselves, but for other people too. But I think the main motivation for getting involved in lesbian things is to meet lesbians, really. Becoming more of an activist, yeah, and thinking more about what it might mean to be lesbian really happened for me in Cork. And that was about getting involved in the women's place there, helping with the coordination of that. But also one of the things that we did was I'd been involved in Belfast with a group of other women in setting up Lesbian Line as a distinct entity, just for women. And I thought it might be an idea for us to do the same in Cork. And again, there was a bunch of women there, and we talked about how we could do it and what that might mean, and practically set it up and have kind of ground rules and policies, and, you know, literally person the phones on a Thursday night. So a group of us got together and established Lesbian Line in Cork, and that was something that was delightful to be involved in. Also, becoming part of the women's place in the Key Co-op was about, one of the things that we did was we set up a library, a women's library in there, and that was great fun too. But probably best of all was getting involved in the Cork Women Fun Weekends. They were just mighty.
What we do in here is we welcome people. You know, we make people feel at home. I say people, it's women, it's lesbians, it's dykes, whatever, you know. But we make them feel at home. Sometimes this is the only place where they're actually out. And so the most important thing for me and for all of us, for the steering group, management committee, the staff, is that the woman who comes in that door is welcomed with a smile, cup of tea, a chat, and that they're just, this is a safe haven for them.
I liked being involved in a lot, you know. It was a place for women to go if they needed, you know, some support, and there was a lot of support there, you know. It was with coming out, it was parent parent support group. I used to love the parent support because there wasn't any parent support at the time.
I thought I really liked the umbrella part where you know we had the lot in the middle and then the groups in an umbrella structure, and for me that reflected equality but also diversity.
I think the kind of structure evolved a little bit from the fact that there was a couple of groups in existence already, like Lesbian Night, Saturday Night Discussion Group, and then Lot Group, and then the Social and Entertainment, and it seemed to make sense to have independent groups coordinating together, and as you say, each group could do their own thing under their own auspices, and then be coordinated and part of Lot, and then share in the Lot resources.
Build together. Me, even listening to some of the discussions, Lot has achieved an enormous amount, and in a way what's really interesting is that there's a load of evidence there for that in terms of reports, pamphlets, posters, so it really does tell the story, and yet I feel quite strongly that we're still written out of LGBT history, or we're constantly either not included or written out, and yet clearly there's loads achieved. You know, I think we pushed that boat out and got it to go in some direction.
One of the founding principles of Lot was to use professional lesbian trainers to always, if at all possible. I remember being really impressed by that from, you know, wherever there was training going on within the organisation, that it would be done by, you know, where at all possible, lesbian trainers. You yourself, I know you contributed and didn't charge and stuff, and I gained hugely from that because I never had any training, and it just makes you more aware. Also, then you can do the work. You know?
Well, this was the whole thing, like, is to have more people doing it. Do you know?
But to even look at, because we actually look at the resource pack, like there's so much in it. It's like, for the time, it's incredible. A lot of the stuff, we would have handwritten an awful lot of stuff because we didn't have the technology, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have all of that stuff. And I was involved in LEN at the time, so we were doing all the stuff for lesbian equality and the legal position for particularly women with kids, or what, and we didn't have a huge amount of rights at the time. But even I'm looking back, and a lot of we really good, like senior counsel who worked with us. We did an awful lot of research in terms of actually getting the material so that you could actually say to women, these are your rights, these are the things you can do. So even that was, because there was nothing there.
And it sort of feels like history is being rewritten through a lens of marriage equality, and I think that's a very narrow and very shallow lens, because it doesn't capture the foundation that was built that allowed marriage equality to happen. You know, without all of that work that went ahead, it would never have happened. And I think so many things that exist now, their roots are in those things, like even things like Belong To, the roots are there in the Lot Leah education pack, and Leah going out and being in schools and creating those relationships with the Department of Education, with the education stakeholders, breaking down so many of the barriers and taboos, and that was being done 20 years ago. Like, it's extraordinary. People think it's only happening now, but those relationships were built then. And I know there are relationships that precede me. I know I stand on shoulders, but I think it's really important that our history is seen, is recognised, and is recorded.
Because of all the work that Lot was doing, there was ways in which connections got made to a bigger world than us just in Dublin. Even though then, as you were saying, it's like you go from the village to the city to, you know, and then you see the bigger world or something. Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was involved with Lesbian Line for maybe 5 years, and at the beginning of the time I would have been on the line, there were women calling, like, in crisis. Do you know, one night a woman called because her partner had just died in hospital, and her partner's family had just excluded her from the room, from the process, from everything. So we had all of that kind of stuff, and by the time I was finishing up with the line, it was like 17-year-olds phoning and saying, how come there's nothing there for me? Like, and it wasn't 100% change, but the balance had changed substantially. And that was at the time that Lot had started doing things that made everything more visible and more harder to ignore.
And I thought we need to do something that has the word lesbian in it, that pulls the fears up to the surface, and people are just going to have to confront it, they're just going to have to deal with it. And that was basically how we started then talking about it with others. Suppose we were to do a day that was called Lesbian Lives, and that be very much a day for lesbians to come and talk about and investigate and explore and hear about research and hear about theoretical work on being lesbian in the world today. That was back in 92, whatever it was. And I took an executive decision, which was not to tell the board, but simply to do it as part of our programme of work, which seemed to me to be a perfectly legitimate, logical thing to do. And it was, of course, also a provocation, because I knew that a conference on sexuality was one thing, a day called Lesbian Lives was a real provocation. But we did it, and everybody wrote in, everybody in women's studies ultimately wrote in with that. And nobody questioned, nobody said you can't do it. People did say, this may cause a bit of a stir. But in fact, in a weird way, it kind of didn't. I don't to this day know why. So then we were much emboldened and said, right, we're going to go and do it again now, we'll do it next year too, and it became a fixture.
I suppose if I had one complaint in the world, it would be that society has not been grateful enough to the lesbian input, not just into feminism, but into trade unionism, into revolutionary struggle, everywhere, at all levels. And you know, and I think that's not just to do with us being lesbian. I think that's a reflection on women's role in general, and that because whatever we do, we still have to go home and do the dishes, kind of thing, and you know, make the lunches for the kids going to school the next day. That as lesbians, we are considered like the very worst end of stroppy women. And I'm very proud to be a stroppy woman.
So in the last 6 or 8 years, I suppose, when I would work still like with the transgender community, they would talk about that they find their community a lot online. Do you know, or in the intersex community would find their community online, or people who are living in very, very oppressive countries. So there's a way in which people are finding their group in all sorts of ways. So it isn't just the physical anymore. And I suppose as well, I think that people are a little bit more aware of the need that they need social outlets, as well as then they need the politics of change to be happening as well.
Because a lot of the research that's coming out is saying that social integration and social relationships, it's the biggest predictor of how long you live, which is quite amazing. That's ahead of diet, exercise, all these things, and I think that's pretty amazing. So I think it's about the connections that people have made. I would conservatively estimate that there's been 20 to 30,000 meetups off the site. So it's created a lot of other meetups and connections with people. I remember running a Monkey Bin Up for about 6 months, and you know, one of the reasons I set it up was because I just didn't find there were other women who, we weren't visible to each other. We didn't know who each other were in a lot of cases. And I had some friends visiting from Toronto, and I brought them on this Georgian walking tour. And I only knew anything about this because one of our members gave us a Georgian walking tour, so I was kind of trying to replicate it. And we were walking along, and twice while we were walking around Dublin, members of RA on the other side of the road, we could wave at each other, and it kind of hit me. We were like ghosts walking by each other. So we've become much more visible.
You want to feel like the parameters of where you are existing are your own, that you're not a guest in someone else's space, or you're not like in lesbian corner and the rest is somehow not yours. And so it's kind of owning those physical spaces and owning those social spaces. Myself and my friends would have run a warehouse party for a while, maybe a year or two, called Bitches Be Crazy, up in a warehouse off Parnell Street, and that was amazing for me, because we're like super female, super queer, and the energy that room had, you know, it was just really, really special. And the energy that dyke spaces have is, you know, really special. And I mean like lesbian and inclusive, you know. And I think that you can't really, there's something kind of thrilling about it or something, you know. There's a shorthand there, you know, that you get everyone there and all the archetypes and stereotypes, and you can identify what kind of people there are. And, you know, one of the most amazing things as well for anyone who runs or has run like club nights and stuff, when you put something on and loads of people come, and especially loads of women, and you're just like, where did all these women come from, you know? And it's just, then all of a sudden your world opens up.
There's research that says that I was the 32nd LGBT plus person elected as a parliamentarian throughout the world. I don't know how many of the ones before me in being elected felt free to name their identity in their parliament, but I certainly did by the time I was elected. That made it all the more special.
Nina Simone said that being an artist, we have the opportunity to say things other people can't say. And I would take it a step farther, and that is, being an artist and out in the forefront of life, we have a responsibility to say things and live a life that other people may not be able to get away with living. And I think, you know, it's very hard to tell a woman who's singing in your face with power and delivering with great stage presence, I can't like you because you're gay. They have to. Sometimes we have to put it in their face and live it in their face.
I enjoyed being part of the civil rights movement in Derry, fighting with the cops and fighting with the unionists. And I very much enjoyed being part of the Irish Women's Liberation Movement. It was enjoyable, looking for freedom from, makes it sound, oppression. See, one of the things about being born gay is you're born outside the law, straight away, church and state at the time. You know, there's something wrong with you and it's immoral and sinful, and so I was always an outlaw.
We're not asking your permission, we're not putting up a fight, but we will reclaim the night. Something like that.
I think it's still really important. It's an opportunity to celebrate the wins and how far we've come, but also to let the wider community know that we haven't achieved equality yet. There's still loads more to do in terms of healthcare, sexual health, recognition for young trans people. So yeah, it's about letting the community know that we aren't healthy, safe and equal yet, and there's more work to do.
I think the big challenge for lesbians and for that sense of lesbian community is to understand and to work with those newer understandings of sexuality as a spectrum, and to, in a way, hold steady with our sense of ourselves and to hold true to that, so that for someone like me who feels myself to be lesbian, not to allow myself to be rocked off that position, so to speak, and to understand that my being lesbian is part of that spectrum, but that other people inhabit different parts of it.
But to do with the future, I think one of the things really that's important as I age, the place of the older lesbian within our community. Housing. Living in Dublin, housing is really difficult. It's a big issue for everybody.
What is really important, and I've always felt this too, is that there are connections. All this, it's not just homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, whatever. All these kind of prejudices and injustice and discrimination and whatever word you want to put on it, they're all intertwined. It's all connected. And I think it's important that communities going forward educate themselves on other communities and try and work together and be respectful too of the different spaces and different needs that would be specific to each community or each little group within the community.
Well, I think there are probably still, I don't know if I'd say name a specific issue, but I think that there's still a lot of scope for feeling more comfortable, supported, and free in the context of families. And so lesbian with children, and to ensure that that's as easy as possible, that that is supported, that that is normalized. And so there's more work to be done, certainly, I know, within schools, depending on what community you're in. So I think that that would be a prime area. And when that is, when that feels comfortable and normal for any family in the context of lesbians who had the family, that's another big change.
I went to see Angela Davis recently, and one of the things she said was about dreaming and how important it is to dream. She said, because future generations will be living your dreams. And I thought that was lovely, but I also thought, you know what, I'm living my own dream as well. Because when I was 19 and 20 and thinking about coming out and being a lesbian and all the rest of it, I never could have imagined that we would have rights, that our rights would be protected, that we would have marriage equality. Of course we don't in the north yet, but in the rest of these islands we can get married, and that would be an option for me. You know, that seems to me to be walking in my own dream these days. So I mean, that's wonderful. So I know things have got better, but we're not there yet.
I don't think that we should be in any way encouraging that it would be the same people. So I just think it's really important you have change in leadership. You know, get out of the way. I mean, that's my community development background. You know, you work for the next generation to take over. That's what you do. That's why you're doing it. So you're doing it for yourself and for your own cohort at that time. But then you must always be investing in the next people, because they need to run things their way for themselves, you know, and you have to get out of the way. It's just the patriarchal power structures being transferred into maybe a women's organisation, but if you have the same person in that women's organisation for 20 years, what is she doing about leadership and evolving and you know, which is what we've always fought for. Like, don't speak for me, let me speak for myself. So if I'm speaking for you, why amn't I letting you speak for yourself? That's where it comes from. Like, you must get out of the way to let people speak for themselves. And if they don't have the confidence or the language or the whatever, then pass it on.
I think that in 5 years' time, LGBTQ plus, or whatever way you want to put it, will probably be obsolete as a term. I mean, there's a lot of other terms coming out. It's like gender and sexual minorities is one of the new terms I'm seeing being used more and more. It's interesting where we're going. I mean, I think what we've got now, we're on the verge of possibly having someone for Taoiseach who's, you know, a gay man but highly conservative. Do I think that's great? No, I don't. Some people would say that we needed to get to a point where it was all about just gay people and trans people can just do the exact same as everybody else. That's never been my politic. So if you ask me where should we go or where are we going, I think we've reached a very interesting crossroads in that we don't have full trans equality, we certainly don't have full women's equality, but we have a lot of the equalities, legal equalities, because I don't think they're necessarily there socially. We have a lot of those equalities that needed to be put in place. So I think what's going to happen is, I mean, this is why I call myself queer, because I think we need to start saying, well, where's the wider, where does that fit in a sense of wider inequality in the world? And really, have we addressed the core and the heart of what all that we went through was about in the first place? And I don't think we have. Because what we haven't addressed, as far as I'm concerned, is how we welcome difference and how we enjoy difference and how have an understanding that difference is what makes the world go round. It's what moves us forwards, what propels change in the world. And instead what I'm saying is like gay people are just like everybody else, and what everything else is at the moment is kind of in a bit of a strange, scary place. So I would say if I was to have my fantasy of where we would go next as queers, it would be that we would be heading where we need to go to next, like the queers have always done, in art, in politics, and that there would be maybe some of us who would kind of go, right, we've got this here now, let's see where we can go next. That's like going to be making the world a much more kind of equitable and livable place for everyone. Everyone.
I don't have a gold star, I don't have a silver star, no, I don't have a bronze star. I'm a no-star lesbian. You can take me out to dinner. Please don't say you'd like me thinner, 'cause I won't change, I won't change for you. You can say you're gender fluid, lipstick, lesbian, macho, druid. Anything you wanna be, it's alright with me, it's alright. Identity, identity, identity. Who are you? Who am I? Not afraid to smash the sky without fear, without shame. Labels, tags, numbers, names. Anything you wanna be, it's alright with me, it's alright. I don't have a check shirt, I don't have a swirly skirt. I got an ass that is quite pert, and a mouthful of delicious dirt for you. You can say you're butcher femme, you can say you're butcher bam, drag king or disco queen, party animal or non-scene. I don't mind if you're any of them, oh, I don't care if you're any of them. It's okay to be none of them. Identity, identity, identity. Who are you? Who am I? Woman, man, trans or bi, he or she, it or them. Labels, tags, numbers, names. Anything you wanna be, it's alright with me, it's alright. I don't have a gold star, I don't have a silver star, no, I don't have a bronze star. I'm a no-star lesbian. I don't have bad hair, no, I don't have bad hair, no, I don't have a bad haircut. I'm not a bad haircut lesbian.